we'll make a start if that's all right, because we don't want everybody to be kept too late. Thank you all very much for coming. My name is Councillor Peter Moore and I represent Dunstan Hill and Whickham East. On gated council, my ward ends just across the road. To my left is Councillor Dr. Jonathan Wallace, who represents Whickham South and Sunnyside. And to my right, what's your name? I think everybody knows Peter, that's why I'm laughing. As you know, Peter represents Whickham North and Swalwell, as does Councillor Chris Ord, who's sitting there. Next to him is Councillor Marilyn Ord, no relation, who represents also Whickham South and Sunnyside. We have apologies, we'll take formal apologies in a second. We have apologies, we have apologies from two of our colleagues who are currently in a school governors meeting, which they couldn't get out of, Councillor Mary Wallace and Councillor John McClure, and they will try and join us later if their governors meeting finishes before this meeting. You will know, and we'll have a formal sort of talk about the background from Jonathan in a second, but you'll know what's inspired us to call this meeting, because we know what's happening in Whickham Village, and rather than beating about the bush, and having said hello, thank you very much for coming, I'll hand over to Jonathan Wallace just to, first of all, give us any apologies he's had, and secondly, to give us the background to this meeting.
Well, I've had apologies from Sonia Hawkins, Thurl Ball Coaches, the Card Shop, Martin Rankin Undertakers, and I keep getting, my BlackBerry keeps buzzing with other messages from businesses, so I suspect there might be one or two other apologies before the end of the meeting. Right, why are we doing this? Well, this year we are celebrating the 25th anniversary of the opening of the Metro Centre, and we're also, within this area we have the retail park at the Team Valley, and there are other out-of-town shopping centres. The effect of that, whilst it's been a great boon to have those centres in our area, it has in effect started drawing trade away from Whickham Village as soon as the Metro Centre opened a quarter of a century ago. And Whickham is certainly feeling the squeeze, and what we want to avoid is a slow death by stealth. We want to make sure that Whickham Village has a strong, vibrant future as a retail, business and leisure centre. It was brought home to us by two significant issues in the last few years. About 4 years ago, the council proposed parking charges for Whickham, for the car park behind St Mary's Green and also down behind the Gibbside. And in a sense we thought a bit of a rearguard action to put those charges off, and Peter is going to go into further detail about that. But we were aware, talking to the businesses 2 or 3 years ago, that this was a significant issue, and we also know that having carried out a survey of our own constituents, that this would be a serious issue were charges to be introduced. And the second, much more recent issue that's obviously impacted on everybody's business here is the closure of the co-op. Now, when the co-op was, the co-op movement first announced that they were taking over the Summerfield chain, then it was actually Peter Moore who contacted the director of the co-op to find out what their intentions were in Whickham. And at the time we were left with the impression that the Oakville Road store would be the one that they would be offloading, and they had to, under the rules of the Competition Commission, they had to get rid of one of the 2 stores in the area. We were expecting it to be the Summerfield store on Oakfield Road. As it turned out, it actually Mills took it on, and unfortunately, when Mills were in the process of being brought up by Tesco's, they were already in the process of closing 16 of their stores, and it looks pretty certain that the Whickham store was one of those shops, which meant that we've had an empty supermarket premises within Whickham, which is effectively the only major size, large size supermarket within the village itself. We've got nicer close by, but in the sense of a weekly shop, it doesn't fit the bill. And I've seen elsewhere where a town centre or a village centre loses its major anchor store, and the rest of the small businesses start to fold, and that's what we want to avoid happening. So it was those two issues that brought to us the need to address the situation of what's happening within Whickham and try to turn the situation around. And that's why we launched the Use It, Don't Lose It campaign, where we try to encourage our constituents to shop here in Whickham. And one of the things that we noticed over the winter period when we had the awful weather was that a lot of people weren't able to get out of Whickham to go to the major out-of-town developments, and we're actually starting to use Whickham a bit more. And the comments that were making to us was that we could do with a major supermarket here. And we share those views, and we want to see the former Mills co-op store occupied as soon as possible by a major retail chain. So that's the background to it, and watch out, we'll be trying to push forward the Use It, Don't Lose It campaign more with our constituents, but clearly we want to be working with you as the business people of the village to be able to make that a success.
Thank you very much. In a second, we're going to hear from Councillor Peter Craig with regards to the vitality strategy and the progress so far. But something that I meant to mention at the outset, I should mention now. The fact is that all of the councillors here today are Liberal Democrats, but this is not a party political matter. This is a community matter, and we've recognised the problem with regard to the community, and that's what's focused our minds. That's why we've started the Use It, Don't Lose It campaign. That's why we're developing a strategy to keep this village vibrant. And with that in mind, I'll hand over to Councillor Peter Craig, who will tell you about the vitality strategy and the progress we've made so far.
Okay. Let's start for this. So, as Peter said before, he introduced us all representing individual wards, but residents don't care where the ward boundaries are. The main thing is that we all live in Whickham or the surrounding area. We all care about what happens to the village and our community. So looking at a joint strategy, the three wards are working together to work on this strategy to try and improve things. There's two questions that we can think about. One, I think, which you're probably sitting there wondering, which is what are we doing about the situation? I'm going to explain in a bit more detail what we're doing to try and improve things. The second thing, which I'll leave you to think about while I'm talking, is what can we do together? As Jonathan said, we want to work together, not just with the residents. We've got the Use It or Lose It campaign. We want to work with the traders of Whickham, try and put together a joint strategy to improve the situation. Now, the first thing I'll say is it's very complicated. It's not an easy thing to solve. We sat down after a couple of things. Jonathan mentioned that we did a survey in summer 2009 when we were talking about reducing car parking charges. Are people in favour of it or not? A lot of the things we got back no, and one of the main reasons was because if you introduce car parking charges here, people are not want to come into the village, and therefore they'll start to spiral downhill. So we put up a very strong campaign against that. We had a lot of backing from residents and traders as well. We put petitions in. We managed to get that put on hold. It's still on hold at the moment, but there is a danger that it will come back, especially in the current situation with cuts in councils and looking at budget cuts and ways of raising money. So for the moment it's been put on hold, but we're always vigilant that it might come back. At some point we might need to act again on that one. So we had a specific campaign against car parking charges. There was another issue last summer where they were talking about the review of schools, primary schools in the area, And our position on that was we want to retain a school in the village because it brings people into the village every day. So that was another campaign that we ran. There's other things that we've done as well. We brought the leader and chief executive here to the village 2 summers in a row. We walked them round and said, look at the state of the pavements, what benches are in the state, shops are closing, some of them are closed. What can you do to help us to have a strategy? So the reason why it's complicated is because there's lots of different departments within the council all doing their own thing. They're all doing good things, but there's nobody with an overview of the strategy across the whole of the village. So that's why we decided that if nobody's going to do that for us, we're going to do it ourselves. We're going to look at the issues, we're going to try and put together a strategy on how to increase the vibrancy and vitality of Whickham. We call it the village, but it's a town. So we started to do that. The problem is that we've got decreased town centre vitality again. The villages, some people have said, something a bit shabby these days, or shops, the range of shops is not what it was. Whatever, however it's described, that's what we're looking at. We've looked at 2 main reasons for that. So if these things happened, it would lead to a further decrease in the village vitality. So on one side, got me down here, I'll leave it out. On one side we've got a thing called decreased footfall, and all that means is that fewer people are actually coming to the village. If we've got fewer people in the village, there's less people accessing the services, spending money in the shops, and then it's more difficult for everybody. The other thing is, on the other side, is a reluctance to visit the town centre. So we have to have reasons to bring people into the village. Now we've expanded these in a bit more detail. So decreased footfall, I've already talked about the potential school closure. So our strategy, part of the strategy is to retain a school in the centre of the village, because then we've got people coming into the village every day. Parents bringing people to children to school. So if we've got people coming into the village, it's more likely to come into the shops as the past 5. So that's one leg of our strategy. Another thing is to do with reduction of council services. Now we used to have a housing office in the village, which was in the old school in Allenton and Arsalat, and we've moved that down to Dunstan now, so we don't have the people coming in for that service. We've still got a library. It's a great library. It's the second most used library in the gates of Borough. So I'm very proud of that, but we will continue to support that. But also, one of the things that we've talked about is trying to introduce something called a one-stop shop, where we can have some gated council services based in the village, perhaps in the library, perhaps somewhere else. But the replacement of the housing office service and perhaps some other services which people can come into the village and access gated council through the village. They've done it in other places like Berkeley, Felling. They've got a thing called gated council at Berkeley, gated council at Felling. And we're saying, why can't we have a gated council at Whickham? So that's another thing which we're pushing. Again, the third thing is to do with transport. We've had several campaigns over the years, and some of you are involved with those, to make sure that we have good bus services into the village. So that's not an issue at the moment. We haven't got any threats to our services, but it's something which we keep a close eye on. And any reduction in our transport links means that people can't get into the village. People from some of the surrounding areas come up into the village to do the shopping. So if there aren't buses, get them up there and not be able to do that. So that's another reason we would have less people coming, or fewer people coming into the village, so we need to be careful about that one. The fourth thing is, we've already talked about reduced quality of retail offering. In other words, not the range or variety of shops that we used to have. We already know that part of that is because of the medical centre on the doorstep. But it's also other things, like we used to have a hardware store in the village. We had Stevenson's for a long time, and I had another one which is just in the shop, which was just a charity shop until recently. And then we started having out of town hardware stores such as B&Q and Home Base. The local shops couldn't compete with that. That's nothing we can really do about it as councillors, but it's something we need to be aware of. And the same for supermarkets. We've got out-of-town supermarkets with big car parks. So one of the things that we've been working on, and Chris Orr and I had several meetings with, we found out the officer who's responsible for bringing shops or letting the shops and bringing retailers into the village. We've had some discussions with him. We've made him aware of the concerns of everybody. He's well aware of that, and he is working to bring some supermarket into co-op, vacant co-op. Now, obviously those discussions are ongoing. You'll hear rumours around the village as to who might be, who could be. Just say that there's a couple of people interested. Can't say who they are because obviously the discussions are confidentiality issues. But that is ongoing. If you've got the latest copy of our focus, you'll see that that's going at looking at all options. One of the options that they're looking at is splitting the unit into two as well, and having those two smaller units. However, we've made them aware that that's not our preference. We would like to have a big supermarket where people can come into the village and do their weekly shop. However, that's outside of our control. Supermarkets have their own strategies on where they want to be, what the customer base wants to be, and we can't force them to come to the village. They will come in if it suits them and it suits their strategy. However, there is interest, and that is ongoing, so there is something happening on that side. Now on the other side, reluctance to visit the town centre. One of the things which we've had as an ongoing issue for a while is an issue with antisocial behaviour. It could be quite low level, it could be kids just hanging around causing a nuisance. We're well aware of that. We've also developed a strategy just around antisocial behaviour in Whickham. We're working with a number of groups in the council. Again, it's complicated. There's at least 7 or 8 different council departments involved in this. But they are now meeting regularly. We have got an action plan now, and we're making progress against that. So at least that part, we're making progress on that. So that's one of the elements of, it's not a huge thing. I mean, it doesn't really put a lot of people off coming into the village, but it can be one of the elements. So that's in hand as well. We talked about car parking. There's 2 issues to that. One of them would be to do with proposed car parking charges, and we opposed that. As I said, at the moment that's on board. The second issue is that sometimes when people come into the village, they can't find space to park. And if that's going to happen, what they're going to do, they're going to drive somewhere else, somewhere where they can't find space. Or perhaps the next time they won't even bother coming to the village, they'll just drive straight on through the village and down to the Metro Centre or to the supermarket. So that's an issue that we're aware of. It can be done without introducing car parking charges. Again, we've had some discussions with the relevant highways officers, and they are looking into options on how that can be done, so we can increase the turnover, so that when people come into the village, there's always a parking space for them. And that is a very important issue when you're talking about having a supermarket, because if you've got a big supermarket there, but nobody can park, how many of the big supermarkets are likely to want to come into the village if they know that there's an issue with parking? So a lot of these things are linked together. And yes, we were working with the highways officer on one thing, we were working with the retail, economic development officers on another thing. We were working on antisocial behaviour, we were working on retail offering, all of these different things, but never before we had a strategy that covers everything. So what we will, the final thing is, people have said, the village is looking at shabby these days. Yes, we're aware of that. We're doing what we can to improve the environment, the local environment. One of the things that we have is, just in the last year, we've got a local community fund, which has been started, and each of the wards are getting some money to spend on their community. We're putting quite a lot of money into different projects around the area, but one of the things that we're looking at is to replace all of the benches in the village, because if you go around you probably find that there's at least 7 or 8 different types. It would be nice if we're all the same and they look better and brighter in the village. So we'll be looking at that as well, and to do that we've documented our strategy. We've now identified an officer within the council who's going to lead the strategy for us and club together all the different groups. So we've got highways engineers, we've got community-based services, we've got property services, we've got local environmental services, we've got community safety, grading standards, and all of these people. We'll bring those all together in one group, and hopefully we'll do what we've done with antisocial behaviour, pull them together into one group which meets regularly, has an action plan and a strategy for taking us forward. So taking that this one step further, we started to look at some of the countermeasures, and I've talked about most of them already, and that's now documented on our strategy diagram. There's a couple of extra things which we thought would help, which I'll explain now. So all of the things that we've talked about already are countermeasures to what we see as the issue in Whickham, and we're working on that. But there's a couple of other things that we could have. One thing is our use it and lose it campaign. So we talked about encouraging residents to come into the village more and use the services. Because if they find out that one day they don't use them, they're going to come down when it snows and they can't track the supermarket, and we're not going to have a supermarket. A lot of people actually commented to me that they enjoyed that day when it snowed because they could walk down the village, they could meet people, have a chat, and they saw people hadn't seen for ages. And that's great, so we could encourage that more. We had a stall in the village 2 weeks ago where we handed out flyers, and that was really just the start of it. But of course those people are in the village anyway. It's a bit like preaching to the converted. What we need to do and what we are going to do is take that campaign out to the rest of the estate. In Whickham, we'll be putting this main story in our focus leaflet, and as you know that goes through every door in Whickham. So we'll be reaching out to those people who don't necessarily use it, which is that they could. So that's another thing. And then there's a couple of other things which we could think about. One, I'll come back to the Traders Association last because it's an agenda item. One thing which we talked about was having some kind of community event in the village. Don't know what form it would take, but as local councillors we could perhaps support it with some of our local funding if it's continued next year, and have maybe a community event in the village centre. Now I know this has been talked about before, and I'm not going to interview because there is at least an idea to have an event for the whole of the village. And we've talked about it before. Yes. So it could be something that we did. We've got a group of people together to organise, and we could support it, and then that could attract people into the village. Maybe one day, you could start off as a day and a weekend, and perhaps a week. Other towns and villages have these events, so why couldn't we have one? And the last thing would be the Traders Association, and that's an item on the agenda. But it's one reason why we wanted to talk to you tonight, first of all, to explain what we're doing, and then the second question that I had was what could we do together. Perhaps one of the things that we could do is form a Traders Association, and then we could have one voice. We might be able to do more together than we could as individuals.
Thanks, Peter. We can do what we can to encourage people to come into Whickham. But there's a limit to what we can do. We fought against the cuts of the flower beds at Church Green because we wanted the centre of Whickham to be attractive for people to want to come. The park isn't what it used to be, but there's a limit to what we can do with the money we have available at our disposal as board councillors. But we're trying to get the park to be a more attractive place. I mean, I've lived in Whickham for well over 50 years, and I remember when the park was the centre of life in this area. It'd be nice if it was again, because to get to the park you have to walk past the shops. We've done that with the Church Green. We fought the cuts in the flower beds. We had a community event before Christmas, which it felt to me to organise. I just happened to draw the short straw at the councillors meeting. And we organised a formal switch on for the Christmas tree lights. It was a very small event in its way, but a lot of children came, a lot of parents came, a lot of teachers came. And if we can do that and make it a success, which we did, we'll build on that in future years. Community events, bring people into the village and make it a more natural thing to do, to come into the village. And then when you're in the village, you would shop.